we are live. Happy iOS Tuesday, and today I have a guest on my channel. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name's Anto Rados. I'm hoping to be an iOS developer in the next coming months. I started my journey in the tech world when I was 17. Had an IT job through my brother-in-law. Had an internship, and that kind of evolved into a part-time and then a full-time position. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do coming out of high school specifically, so I stayed at a local community college, kind of worked, saved up money, and then transferred to a 4-year degree college when I knew what I wanted to do or had at least a better idea. And then within like 2 or 3 weeks of getting there, I changed my major. So yeah, it really turns out I didn't know what I wanted to do. So yeah, after college, I went back into IT and did desktop support and some system admin things. And now I'm trying to transition into iOS. So,
Nice, nice. So, a couple of things before we continue. So, if you want to chat with us or have questions, please send us a chat message and we will answer that. And for the chat conversation and the live stream, please be respectful. So we're all here to have a good time, and our live stream is normally very, very informal. I have a few questions that I prepared for Anto, but like it doesn't mean that we just gonna talk about that. So very informal. If you're new here, just say hi. If you have questions for Anto, like also feel free to send us a chat message. So with that being out of the way, why iOS?
well, that's a funny story. So when I wasn't actually planning to go the computer science route in college, I was chasing engineering. And my roommate, who I actually knew from high school, we ended up rooming together, and I saw him programming, and he was working on an iOS app for a contract job he had while he was in college, so he was fairly knowledgeable. And yeah, I sat there, I think, for like 2 or 3 hours and just watched him program. And I fell in love with iOS. Everything just seemed so smooth. And this is even back in the days of Objective C. So not as pretty as Swift, but yeah, it caught my attention, and I just kind of ran with that. And all the devices that Apple puts out, they really have an artistic side to it, and I feel like they really brought that into their programming language. So that's kind of kept my interest since then.
Nice, nice. The first time when I started working with iOS, I like my background is a little bit different. I started working in IT or in tech as a QA engineer, and my one of my projects was iOS project, and ever since, like you know what, like I just do want to do anything else, and then like I liked it so much that I decided to do just development. So like I totally see the enticement from iOS. I don't know what it is like, and you mentioned it was Objective C. Like I don't know why it's so appealing for like certain people, because like for me it's just like, yeah, it's so cool. I literally don't want to do anything else. I'm open to Android and like to Flutter, React Native, those kind of frameworks, that they're fine, and I think it would be fun to explore. But I just don't want to do any type of development like web development or backend development. I don't think I'm there yet.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. That was when you sent me these questions. That was the first time that I actually thought about like why iOS. And at first, I couldn't think of why. I mean, when you think about it, Android, programming is pretty much the same thing, until you kind of do both and you realize they're completely different. But yeah, there is just something nice about iOS. It's clean.
Have you done anything with Android?
Very little, very little. I tried to get into it, but I feel like I still have way too much to learn for iOS. So I'm trying to keep it to that, and then maybe one day I'll branch out, but we'll see.
Okay. So, tell me how did you start learning iOS development? Like officially learning. What were your steps? Where did you start? Like I guess the like that process. Okay, I want to be iOS developer now. So first thing, A, B, C, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so well, the first thing I did was switch my majors to computer science. So that kind of provided the background. And I at first it felt like I didn't understand what was happening. It seemed like even though I was a junior at the time, but I switched majors, so I was starting fresh basically. So I'm in there with other, freshmen at the time, and it seemed like they knew what was happening, and I was kind of lagging behind in that. But eventually things started clicking, so that kind of progressed. But outside of school, really, I just started reading books. There was a course, and I forgot the author now. I feel bad about that, but it was on Udemy, and I believe it was like iOS 7, maybe.
Mhm.
But yeah, there was a several hours long course, just kind of you build a basic application, and that's how it really started. And then from there, just as I needed things, I would try to look up like how do you do this in iOS and try to follow a tutorial or just read up on it. But at one point, I did get stuck in a trap of like that tutorial trap where you just keep watching these videos so you learn how to do things, but you never do those things. So I started building my own applications, just little things to get going. But for the most part, it's been Udemy courses, Sean Allen on YouTube,
Mhm.
Twitter, huge. I think that one really kind of tied everything together for me. Paul Hudson, Stuart Lynch, those guys are all great. And I mean, they're very regimented. So they kind of give you an outline of a good roadmap to follow. But like I said, Sean Allen was the one that really kind of brought things together for me. Like his Launchpad course was great. His take home project, I actually used that on my resume. So I've had compliments about that. Um, so yeah, he's a great resource. So YouTube is number one, I think.
Nice, nice. And what is the most difficult part of iOS development for you?
The design, honestly, and it's not specific to iOS, but I do feel like Apple has a very kind of stringent outlook on their human, interface guidelines and all that. But yeah, the design, just I'm not an artistic person, um, so I lean more towards analytical, and I like coding, but the design is just I don't know that part. I feel like you can't learn; it has to come naturally, and I struggle with that. But within the programming itself, probably concurrent programming, anything that's asynchronous, or managing time complexities, which I haven't done too much of the time complexities at this point. But yeah, all those things are what I would say are the more difficult things to kind of master.
Okay, okay. So I see a few people are watching us. So if you have questions or thoughts, our live stream is super informal. So please let us know or just say hi and also do the YouTube things like the stream, share the stream, and who knows, maybe one of your friends is looking to for a new career and iOS development might be it. So, uh, and how about the most exciting part of iOS development? What excites you about iOS development?
Sure. And I touched on that a little bit earlier, but I really can't pinpoint it. But it's just it feels good when it runs. Like when you get that first application up and it launches and you get it green, no errors, maybe a couple warnings, but those are fine. But yeah, the feeling you get when an app runs for me, um, is different for iOS than it is for like C++ or Python or whatever. I'm not sure why that is, but it's just a rewarding feeling. And I'm hoping to add publishing an application to that list, which I'm in the process of right now. So we'll see, but I think that's going to be a good feeling.
Yeah. You know what? It's interesting. I have a friend. She is or she was a bartender at the local bar where I live, and she decided to go to a coding boot camp, and she completed her first like module zero or pre-start or preparation course. And the way she described it, like, you know what? It's like bad, 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 and then good, and then bad, and then good, and then bad, and then good, and then bad. And like, you know what? I've been like a developer for a while, and it's the same for me. It's like bad, good, bad, like good, bad, good, or like bad, 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 bad. Oh, good. So I don't think it ever like goes away. And I like how you put it. I like when my app runs because on certain projects, you sometimes spend days or weeks, like your project just wouldn't compile, either like because it's an outdated Swift version or like certain frameworks were deprecated and you have to untangle them from your project and stuff like that. It just yeah, it's good when it runs. But like I do like iOS development in general. I just I think I think I'm less anxious about like, oh, I don't know what to do because like every single ticket that I work on, I start like, I don't know what to do. And at this point, like, well, I don't know what to do, and that's fine. I just have to figure out or pair with someone or decide if it is doable at all. Oh, great interview so far. Thank you so much. Um,
Oh,
so did you want to say something?
sorry, I recognize the name that sent that in that message. It's my buddy John. Shout out to him.
Oh, hey. Thank you for joining our
but
live stream.
but what you were saying about the kind of the hours you put into it, it's funny how there are even simple things that should only take several minutes, and for some reason it just doesn't work. And there's always that aha moment where you're like, wow, that was either a dumb mistake and I'm glad I caught it, or it was a really complex issue and you figured it out, so you can feel good about that. But either way, you either kind of humble yourself or you're gonna feel really good. But it's the troubleshooting is or debugging rather is a huge part of it for me, I think. Um,
It is. Like not like maybe like few weeks ago, like maybe a couple of weeks ago or so, I was working on infinite scrolling or re-implementing infinite scrolling or improve like just to improve performance overall. And it took me like 4 days to figure out a bug with the infinite scrolling. And the solution was so easy. I mean, it was like it wasn't so easy. It was like it was pretty logical what you have to do, but it took me 3 days and a lot of print statements like to figure out how item and index path and all of that works together with like multiple sections and things like that. So and I finally figured it out and it felt so good.
it truly does. And what you were saying about boot camp earlier, I just finished a iOS certification type program with Dev Mountain. Shout out to them; they're great. But yeah, you kind of you get the kind of guidance from them, which is awesome, but you still have to kind of make your own mistakes and all that. And as you're saying, the infinite scroll, I'm thinking back to my own horror stories and index path. Just for some reason, I fully understand what it does, but for some reason, like it took a while to process that as I'm trying to work it into an app. So I'm like, okay, I understand, it's pointing to an element, but for some reason it just doesn't click. So there's a lot going on, even when it doesn't have to be difficult, it can be. So
Yeah, and we have a question from the audience. What are some techniques you use to break that creative block?
oh man. I honestly, I talk to my sister. She's artsy, so I'll tell her what I'm trying to do, and she'll kind of guide me. Now, she's not an artist or anything, but she's got a better eye for that sort of thing than I do. And I'll try to look online and see something if I'm making a health app, let's say. I'll look at other ones and kind of see what the theme is. But Apple does do a good job of kind of narrowing your focus in that they give you guidelines that, if you're going to publish, they want it to look like it's an Apple product. So you do have guidelines to follow, but you pick your own color schemes and all that. So if you can't match colors, you're done. But no, there's plenty of tools out there, but sometimes it's just time. Try a bunch of different things, and eventually it'll click. Hopefully,
Yeah,
but
I
that's
think
what's worked for me, really.
yeah, I think Apple also like the frameworks that Apple developed really allows us or allow us because now we have UI kit and Swift UI. Those two frameworks really allows us to create very beautiful UI and like really do like very complex things, very like creative things with like not I don't want to say minimal effort because like even with Swift UI when people say oh it's so easy, I mean it's easy until you hit that uh blocker when you know exactly what to do in UI kit, but like in Swift
Mm-hmm.
UI it either hasn't been implemented yet or it just won't work the way you intend. But I think iOS like grew so much that you can do so much more rather than just like a typical like collection view and table view. And you have so many tools in your arsenal that um you can develop whatever you want and like not sometimes I work on the teams that like Android app and iOS app, they would look identical. It's not like, in my opinion, it's not really recommended, but like you can do it if you want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and it may have sounded like there when I was talking that there was like a narrow focus on design in with Apple or in iOS, but no, like you said, you have so many tools you can use to make it beautiful. I mean, there really isn't a limit of what you can imagine you can design on the Apple platform. So that's great, but I think I'm more limited personally by my lack of imagination. But if that's the case, I feel like in my own experience, kind of surveying other people really helps. Get some different ideas, see if something works.
Yeah, you know what helps me? Like I use website Dribble and Dribble
Mm-hmm.
has a number of good designs. So let me try to find it like online. If I can, I will send the link. Um, but like Dribble is an amazing platform that has different sample. It's not just for iOS. It is for web development. It is for Android apps, like not just Android apps, but like for mobile apps in general. So like this is the website, and I use it all the time. I use it. Like a few live streams ago, I started doing like complex UI with Swift UI, and I was thinking like, how do I want to challenge myself? Because like a list view or like grid view or like those like traditional layouts on the mobile app, they're kind of boring, and I think if you like went through one tutorial or a couple of tutorials, you kind of know how to do that. But Dribble like really helped me to find inspiration and like really cool ideas for my project that like I streamed a little bit ago.
Yeah, it is a great site. I've done a little bit of web design as well, or just front end in general. But yeah, Dribble, I forgot who showed me it, but that was a lifesaver. I mean, it's a great tool. Definitely use that if you can.
Yeah, and tell me about like as an iOS developer, we or as iOS developers, we are learning all the time. Like I'm learning at my job, and at this point, it's not necessarily about iOS because like I know how to do iOS stuff. Like I'm learning like architecture or certain things or the way things we do, or like even like if I work with a part of code that I've never worked before, it's a learning experience for me. So tell me about how do you learn new technology? How do you learn new frameworks? How do you learn new code base? That kind of
Sure.
stuff.
I think that honestly changes as you kind of grow in your career. My kind of first instinct was to read books on it. You know, that's how I learned in school and college, so that's why I tried to keep doing. But eventually, you kind of get caught in this like tutorial trap where you can't really watch, nothing but tutorials because you're not implementing anything. So eventually, you do need to get in and program. Um, and I think that's the best way to learn is think of something you want to make and then proceed to kind of break it down into smaller sections and try to kind of look up, how do I make this portion work? Like what does that entail? Like, I want to display something on the screen. Like you have plenty of options for that, but more often than not, you're going to need like a specific way for what you're thinking. Um, so yeah, you progress that way, but tutorials, great to start with, but implementing things, I think, is really the way to go. If you're lucky enough to find someone that'll help you with this, like a mentor, that's I mean that's the best way. I it depends, person to person. Some people like just kind of listening to things, and that's how they learn. But I think person to person contact there is the best way. If someone's already gone through the troubles of learning something, they've made mistakes you haven't thought of yet. So they can kind of guide you. And if you stumble into that mistake, they can guide you to solve it yourself, not necessarily give you the answer. But mentorship, I think, is the biggest, best one.
Yeah, I agree with you on that because I wish, I mean, I was in a unique situation when I decided to go full speed or full time on iOS development. I was working with iOS team, and my team was really excited when I told them like, "Hey, like I would like to do iOS development. Like, give me give me more work, give me more tickets." And I found so much support from my coworkers, and it doesn't really have to be like pair programming or like they don't really have to look into your project that you stuck on, just a conversation about how to do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And when more senior developers explain to you certain concepts, and like this is kind of what hit me because I followed a bunch of tutorials like Paul Hudson, Sean Allen, Brian Woon. I think those three people that I follow like fairly closely. But when your coworker tells or talks to you about architecture and how to work with existing code, and like suddenly realize that with tutorials you learn like the basic concept, like let's say how a table view works or how a collection view works or how a scroll view works, but to implement that like in in a real project, you might have to rethink and dive into that architecture a little bit deeper to understand how really table view or collection view works in that particular project. Because we all know, for example, you can set up your, let's say, like data source, and in your data source, you may listen to some sort of array to display items. But like, what if it is a dynamic array? What if it's not like, you don't have like constant, like it can be different type of array to display. So how do you handle that? So in that case, you might end up with a very complex data source, and the data source
Mhm.
in some instances might be a different file, so it not, or a different class, so it not always equals self. So as we like get used to, like with a lot of tutorials, or the same example, like infinite scrolling. A lot of tutorials will tell you that, hey, you have to scroll all the way till the end, and then refresh or like make a network call, which is, in my opinion, from what I'm seeing, like at least with the apps that I work with, it's a terrible advice, because the purpose of infinite scrolling, that your user doesn't actually notices that there's a network going on. So like, let's
Mhm.
say if you ever like use Twitter, like you never know when Twitter makes network call. You just keep scrolling, but under the hood, Twitter makes a number of network calls as you keep scrolling, but
Mhm.
you never notice it. You only notice it when you hit the bottom, or like something went wrong, like not necessarily something went wrong, but something is going on the networks that they don't have more items to load. Either like your followers didn't post a lot of stuff, or you don't have a lot of followers, or Twitter has to like think about it, like, okay, you hit all the content, let me redirect you to the to a different um service. Or I
Mhm.
don't know how Twitter works under the hood, but like that would be my guess. But like that implementation, like hit the last item, hit the bottom of the scroll view, and then reload. That is not necessarily works all the time. It's not really infinite scrolling. At that point, I think you can create a button to reload more data. So if user wants to scroll more, so like just a little caveat, like from what you see in tutorials and what you see in the real life. And also for my channel, when I create tutorial or a tutorial, I do realize that that code is just a concept, but you can't just like copy my code and paste in your project, unless it is a startup and there's no code, and some sort of code is better than no code, then it probably would work. But again, you work with other people, and I think the challenge with like tutorials to work with other people and explain them how that works. Because the first time when I did that and I implemented the code from a tutorial, a lot of engineers like asked me questions like, why? Like it's not
Mhm.
how our architecture works. This is It's going to be really difficult to unit test. So they asked me a bunch of questions, and like really at that moment it was kind of um awakening for me, like, well, like I just need to dive deeper, and maybe at some point I have to slow down to go faster. Because like, yes, I implemented my view controller or my feature really really fast. It took me like probably a day, but other developers, when they saw it, they said like, well, it's not going to take you a day, it's going to take you about like 4 or 5 days. It's a big feature, so like go ahead and re-implement everything, because it's the how it work. This is going to be untestable, and you're gonna struggle with that piece of code, maintaining it moving forward. And I think that was a great learning experience for me personally.
Yeah, and it does sound like you had that guidance from a more senior developer, and that's kind of what I was referencing earlier. If you have that support, they don't let you make the mistakes they made, but you learn why you shouldn't
Yeah.
make that mistake. And with tutorials, it's great, but they give you like an outline for what you need to do. But it's also I've caught a few where I end up doing something and I don't need to, but I'm that's how I learned this concept. So I'm doing it top down the way I learned it in that tutorial. So there's no like
Mhm.
fluidity with your code. And if you do have someone review it, like, yeah, it might work, but like you were saying with the infinite scroll, you're going to see the loading time. And that's where the experience takes over, where, you can optimize your code, which is really hard when you don't have that support system. But if you're just getting into iOS, that's not something I would worry about immediately. I would worry more about, understanding the concepts and
How
moving from
table
there.
view
But
works.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, once you're past that, it does become harder the more because there's less and less material. But Apple gives you, guidelines, documentation. So there's always a way to learn more. So I'm actually just now getting to a point where I can read through the documentation that Apple provides without just stumbling through it for like hours on end. So that's a great feeling too. But yeah, there's just different stages to it.
Yeah, that's true. I was gonna say a joke. What is documentation?
Nobody knows.
Right. But if let's say if not iOS, what other technology would you choose to go for?
um, well, at the time, if I had to pick, I'm not sure. But looking at kind of the past now, or what I think is going to be big going forward, Python, data science, machine learning, those are all things that I would kind of focus on. I think Python would probably be the language I would stick with, um, and try to kind of use it professionally. But yeah, I think that's really the way of the future. Um, yeah.
I have a lot of good feelings about Python because as I was working as a QA engineer and I was trying to automate my testing. So the the way you can do that, you can use Java or you can use Python or you can use JavaScript. So I started with Java and I have PTSD from Java because I had no computer science background. I had no like I didn't go to boot camp. I just picked up a tutorial how to like automate a website with Selenium WebDriver and with Java and nothing really worked. I didn't really understand why things happening the way they do. But
Mhm.
Python, on the other hand, it was so easy to understand. It was so easy to implement. And granted, I haven't worked with Python for a long time. I started working on my iOS project, and funny enough, that my interview process for that role was like an interviewer asked me a coding question, and I switched from JavaScript to Python, and I passed my interview question for Python for mobile developer or for mobile developer and test. And from the day one, uh, I didn't have to learn Swift. So the way they asked me, like, okay, you're an expert. So how would you go about automating UI for mobile application? And the way I approach things as an engineer, as a developer, like, okay, a native framework probably would be a good one because like they know how the system works, and the third party frameworks, a lot of frameworks they build on the native frameworks, they just add new things that kind of difficult to achieve with the native framework, again utilizing the native framework. So I decided to go with XCT test and XCY test, and I learned Swift in like it took me like probably a couple of weeks, but again, like I have background in programming with Python. Like, okay, like that's I understand like certain concepts. I put together a framework, and yeah, like Python was, I think Python was my uh teacher in a way in the world of programming, because after Python, Java become more much more easier. Like, oh, like now I understand inheritance, now I understand polymorphism, and like just basic concepts without like crazy syntax that really scares you. For example,
Mhm.
I don't know like exactly, but you have to declare the type, you have to declare the name of the variable, and then you have to say new and create another variable, which like was really confusing at the time. So yeah, I see more people commenting. Hey guys, I'm at work watching. Uh, Happy to cut this live. What about Svetle? S- I don't know what Svetle
Not sure.
is.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Well, I'm happy to have you here, Tim. So like, and I see like people are joining in and out. So do the YouTube thing, like the stream, share with your friends, and maybe one of your friends is looking for a new career, and iOS development would be a great one. So yeah, I really appreciate all of you. So uh, we are approaching the end of the year. If you had an opportunity to ask Swift Santa for new things for WWDC, what those things would be?
Oh man, specific to Swift or just Apple products in general?
Uh, Anything. It can be Swift, it can be
Mm.
Apple product, it can be frameworks.
Um, Interesting. Uh, so I'm a big fan of the Apple Watch or just health related apps in general. So I have older series watch that I actually don't wear anymore. But I was reading about the new one, and they do the oxygen level scans in your blood, the heart rate, the EKG. Um, I would love to see them add more. There you go. I would love to see them add more functionality, health functionality to their watches. Um, Something I noticed when I used it, and I don't know if this is multiple people or if I'm in the minority here, but there was just so much going on the watch. It was always bogged down with just constant, email notification, phone messages, Twitter, this and that. Um, so I know that's personal preference. You can adjust most of that. But something I thought was always lacking was a better kind of health aspect to it. I had a Fitbit Ionic, um, and I had it for a year or 13 months. It broke literally the month after the warranty wore off. But their health stuff was great. I mean, everything it did for tracking, it was you could tell that it was oriented toward a healthy lifestyle. So I would love to see Apple do that more, and they have been doing it. But it's Apple, so when I see a product of theirs, I expect it to be top of the line. So I feel like they could grow there a little bit.
Yeah, nice, nice. Yeah, for me, I I want a native support for testing in Swift UI. I think it was my wish for
Ooh.
previous WWDC and for this, like, because listen, Swift UI is getting very, very, very serious. So a lot of
Mm,
companies out there, they want to use Swift UI. And every time a recruiter like reaches out to me, or like somebody asks, like, hey, like we're looking for like Swift UI developer or a developer who knows Swift UI, I am
mhm.
low key terrified. Like, okay, if I were to join that project, I have to test that. How would I test that? I mean, there is a framework that makes it possible, but for thing like for things like unit test, I don't want to depend on a third party framework to handle my
Mhm.
unit test. I mean, there is Quick and Nimble as a framework for testing, and it's great. But I can replace Quick and Nimble with XCT test. So like I won't I know how to do that because I have native support for that. I just choose or we just choose go with Quick and Nimble because it is behavior oriented testing, and certain things is just easier to do with Quick and Nimble. But if tomorrow Quick and Nimble breaks and doesn't compile anymore and there's no support, yes, it will take a lot of time, but like it is possible to like move to XCT test. Easy.
Mhm.
For Swift UI, if that library that was developed for unit testing is not going to be supported, you know, it's not a good time. Like I can probably do UI tests, but with UI tests, what if there is some sort of logic to my view, right? And I would like to test that
Sure.
logic. I would like to test edge cases. UI test is good for integration tests, but like for like what if I implemented that logic incorrectly? And like there were times when I implement the feature and I think it works, and I go to unit test that, and my unit test fails because there are fundamental flaws in my logic as I thought of that logic. So I either
Mhm.
have to adapt the unit test or I have to like fix my logic. So that's why I want a native solution for Swift UI unit testing. That would be my wish for
That'd be great.
WWDC.
And I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if they do include that. Apple just historically they do add on things that whether the public asks for it or not, they'll add what they feel is right. But it's funny what you're saying about companies kind of looking for Swift UI. I think in general the going trend is if you're learning iOS, learn UI kit and know about Swift UI. But so many companies are, going to stick with UI kit for years to come. All these job postings I'm seeing that are for Swift UI, I mean, it's its own little division there. It's like, great to have, yeah, but it's not the requirement yet. But I do see it moving that way. I
Hmm.
just can't see Apple supporting multiple, languages. So I think UIKit will eventually go away, but yeah, Combine and Swift UI seems to be the thing coming up. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's time for us to wrap up. And before we go, how people can find you?
I am on LinkedIn, Anto Rados. You can find me on there. I am on Twitter. I forgot what my Twitter handle is right now. If anyone can type that into the chat, that'd be great. Um, I think it's Anto R iOS. That should be it.
I
But
should
yeah,
have asked you
that's the
before
two
the
things I'm
stream.
on.
I totally forgot.
No worries. um, if you have a second, I can check real quick. And that is, yeah, so it is iOS ANTOR. So that's my Twitter handle there.
All right. And if you could send me that info on LinkedIn, so after the live stream,
Mhm.
I will just post like a comment for the live stream so people can find you. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us live today. Like I think we had an amazing interview, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. I had a great time. Thank you for having me. It was a blast. I still feel pretty new to iOS, so this is definitely awesome to have done. I want to give a real quick shout out to my fiance Kate. She's great, fully supportive of my switching careers. All my friends, John, Johnny, Bash, Derek, they asked for shout outs, so there they are. Thanks for the support, guys.
And also go hire Anto.
That's right.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.